Sometimes a man loses everything before he finds what he was meant to discover. Martin Kell had buried his wife, lost his savings, and watched his neighbors shake their heads when he spent his last $25 on a worthless piece of desert. The land was nothing but sand and rattlesnakes. No water, no shade, just emptiness stretching out under a merciless sun. But when Martin drove out to see it, he found an old farmhouse that shouldn't have been there. And standing in front of it was a woman named Calyx, barefoot and half-wild, who looked at him like she'd been waiting her whole life. She said she was watching the line. What did that mean? And why had nobody told him about her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Martin Kell's hands were stained with 30 years of engine grease. No amount of scrubbing ever got them completely clean. He'd stopped trying around the time Sarah got sick. These days, he just ran them under cold water at the end of his shift and called it good enough. The small mechanic shop on the east side of Bakersfield had been his whole world once. A place where problems had solutions, where a broken thing could be fixed if you knew where to look and had the right tools. But life wasn't an engine. Life didn't come with a manual. He stood in the small office behind the garage bay, looking at the stack of envelopes on his desk. Medical bills, mostly. Some were 2 years old. The ones on top were stamped in red. Final notice. There was a letter from the county court about child support arrears. Another from the bank about the second mortgage. He'd opened that one this morning and immediately wished he hadn't. The window overlooked the shop floor. His toolbox sat where he'd left it, beside the 04 Silverado he was supposed to finish by Friday. He'd owned this place for 18 years, built it from nothing with Sarah at his side, back when they were young and stupid enough to think hard work was all you needed. She'd done the books, handled the customers, kept everything running while he buried himself under hoods and chassis. Now the books were a mess, the customers were scarce, and Sarah had been in the ground for 3 years. Martin pulled the chain from inside his shirt. The gold ring caught the fluorescent light, turning slowly on its links. He'd taken it off her hand the day before the funeral, because he couldn't stand the thought of it going into the earth with her. His own ring had slipped off years ago. He'd lost weight during her illness and never bothered to resize it. But hers, he kept close. Sometimes he held it and tried to remember what her fingers felt like. Warm and small and always fixing his collar or brushing grease off his cheek. The memories were getting harder to hold on to. That scared him more than the bills. His daughter Emma was 17 now, living with Sarah's sister in Fresno. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until Martin got back on his feet after the funeral. That was 3 years ago. Now she barely called, and when she did, there was a distance in her voice that felt like blame. He was behind on the child support payments. The court had sent warnings. Emma's aunt had sent worse. He wasn't a deadbeat. He wanted to be clear about that. He'd tried. He'd worked doubles, taken side jobs, sold everything that wasn't bolted down. But medical debt was a hole that kept getting deeper no matter how much you threw in. Grief was the same way. You could work yourself to exhaustion trying to fill it, but at the end of the day, you were still standing at the edge looking down. The town noticed. Bakersfield wasn't small, but it wasn't big enough to disappear in. People at the diner knew his situation. The guys at the auto parts store gave him pitying looks. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had stopped asking how he was doing and started leaving casseroles on his porch instead, which was somehow worse. He'd become a cautionary tale, the mechanic who couldn't fix his own life. Last Tuesday, he'd gone to the post office and seen a flyer on the community board. Public auction for delinquent tax properties. The county was selling off parcels of land nobody wanted. Places too remote or too worthless to maintain. It was the kind of thing he'd normally walk right past, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the weight of the ring against his chest. Maybe it was the final notice from the bank burning a hole in his back pocket. The auction was Saturday morning at the county assessor's office. Martin had $27 in his wallet. He'd gone anyway, not sure why, just knowing he needed to be there. The room was half empty. A few developers looking for cheap flips, some retirees hoping for a project. The auctioneer was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who rattled through the lots like she had somewhere better to be. Most properties went for a few hundred, maybe 1,000. Martin sat in the back and listened to legal descriptions of land he'd never see. Township coordinates, acreage, zoning. Then she got to Lot 47. 40 acres, unimproved, no utilities, no road access, located approximately 38 miles northeast of city center in the unincorporated desert area. Property is sold as is, with no warranty or guarantee. Minimum bid is $25. No one raised a hand. The auctioneer waited. $25 for 40 acres. Anyone? Martin's hand went up before his brain caught up. He didn't know why. The number felt right. $25. It was all he had left after this week's gas and groceries. It wasn't enough to pay the light bill. It wasn't enough to make a dent in anything that mattered. But it was enough for this. Sold to bidder 17 for $25. The woman next to him snorted. Behind him, someone muttered something about fools and money. Martin didn't care. He walked to the front, signed the papers, and handed over the crumpled bills. The clerk gave him a property deed, a parcel map, and a look that said she'd seen this before. Desperate people making desperate choices. When he walked out, the sun was high and hot. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and looked at the deed. His name, printed in official county typeface, Martin James Kell, owner of Lot 47, Township 32 South, Range 26 East, 40 acres of nothing. The guys at the shop heard about it by Monday. Ray, his only remaining employee, had laughed so hard he'd nearly dropped a wrench. You bought what? Desert land. For $25? 40 acres, Martin had said quietly. 40 acres of sand and rattlesnakes. Jesus, Martin, what are you going to do with it? He hadn't known how to answer. He still didn't. The truth was, he didn't have a plan. He just needed something. Anything that was his. Something the bank couldn't take. Something the court couldn't garnish. Just a piece of paper that said he owned a small corner of the world, even if that corner was worthless. His neighbor, Tom Briggs, had stopped by the shop that afternoon with a smirk. Heard you're a real estate mogul now. Martin had kept his eyes on the carburetor he was rebuilding. It's just land. It's a joke. Everybody knows that property. It's been on the auction block for 20 years. Nobody wants it because there's nothing there. No water table, no road, just dirt and heat. You got swindled, buddy. I paid $25. You overpaid. That night, Martin had sat alone in his small rental house. He'd lost the real house 2 years ago, and spread the parcel map on his kitchen table. The coordinates put the property somewhere in the desert northeast of town, past the agricultural areas where the land turned to scrub and sand. The map showed a rough square, no buildings, no features, just empty space. He traced the boundary lines with one finger. 40 acres. Big enough to disappear in. Big enough to belong to. He thought about Sarah. She would have called him crazy. She would have laughed and kissed his cheek and told him to return it if he could. But she also would have understood. She'd always understood the part of him that needed to build something, to have something to show for the hours and the sweat. He made a decision then. He'd go see it. Just once. He'd drive out, walk the property, and maybe understand why he'd done this foolish thing. And then he'd come back and figure out how to keep the lights on for another month. Saturday morning came cool and clear. Martin woke before dawn, made coffee, and loaded a few supplies into the truck. Water, a flashlight, the parcel map. He left a note on the counter for nobody, locked the door, and headed east as the sun broke over the Tehachapi Mountains. The city fell away quickly. Subdivisions gave way to farmland, then to open desert. He followed a state highway until it turned to county road, then to dirt track. The map's coordinates led him down a washboard path that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Dust plumes rose behind his truck. The landscape was all pale earth and creosote bushes, Joshua trees standing like sentinels against the empty sky. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. The kind of beauty that didn't care if you appreciated it or not. After an hour, he checked the GPS on his phone and realized he was close. He slowed, looking for any sign of his property. A fence line, a marker, anything. What he found instead took his breath away. There, rising from the desert floor like a memory, stood an old farmhouse. It shouldn't have been there. The deed said unimproved. The county record said empty land. But there it was, weathered wood, a sagging porch, windows dark with age. The house looked like it had grown from the sand itself, part of the landscape, ancient and patient. Martin stopped the truck and sat staring. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. The parcel map didn't show a structure. The satellite images he'd looked at online had shown nothing but bare ground. Yet here was a house, solid and real, waiting under the morning sun. He got out slowly. The desert air hit him, dry and clean and already warming. His boots crunched on the hardpan as he approached. The house was maybe 80 years old, built in a simple farmhouse style with a pitched roof and a stone foundation. The wood was sun-bleached, nearly white. Some of the windows were intact, others were just dark openings, and standing in front of it, barefoot in the sand, was a woman. Martin froze. She was perhaps 30 or perhaps 50. It was hard to tell. Her skin was deeply tanned, almost burned, and her hair hung in dark tangles past her shoulders. She wore what might have once been a dress but was now just ragged strips of fabric held together by stubborn threads. Her feet were bare and dusty. Her eyes, when they met his, were the pale gray of desert stones. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching him with an expression that was neither welcoming nor hostile. Just waiting. "Hello?" Martin's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. This is my property. I just bought it. I didn't know anyone was here." The woman tilted her head slightly, like a bird considering a strange sound. "Are you okay?" He took a step closer. "Do you need help?" "I've been watching the line," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "Waiting for you." The words made no sense. Martin glanced around, looking for what? A vehicle? A camp? Some explanation for this woman's presence in the middle of nowhere. But there was nothing. Just the house, the woman, and the empty desert stretching to the horizon. "Watching what line?" he asked carefully. She pointed past the house. "The boundary. Someone has to watch it. I've been here a long time." Martin followed her gesture, but saw only more desert. Sand, rocks, a few twisted Joshua trees. No fence, no line, no boundary of any kind. "I don't understand," he said. "What boundary? And how did you know I was coming?" "Everyone who's called comes eventually." She turned those pale eyes back to him. "You're Martin Kell. You lost your wife 3 years ago. You have a daughter named Emma. You spent your last money on this land because you needed something that was yours alone." Ice ran down his spine. "How do you know that?" "I know everyone who comes to the line. I know their names and their sorrows. It's part of watching." This was wrong. All of it was wrong. Martin took a step back toward his truck. "Look, I don't know what this is, but—" "My name is Calyx," she said simply. "I can't leave. Not yet. Not until someone takes my place." The morning sun was climbing higher, and the desert heat was building, but Martin felt cold. This woman, Calyx, was either dangerously unstable or what? He didn't have an answer for that. "I should go," he said. I'll come back. We'll figure this out." "You'll come back," she agreed. Not a question, a certainty. Martin turned and walked quickly to his truck. His hands shook as he started the engine. Through the windshield, he could see Calyx still standing there, watching, not moving, just waiting. He put the truck in reverse and backed down the dirt track, not trusting himself to turn around. The farmhouse receded in his mirror, and with it, the strange woman who knew his name. When he finally reached the paved road, he stopped and sat breathing hard, gripping the steering wheel. This was insane. He'd just met a mentally ill woman squatting on his property, and instead of calling the sheriff, he was sitting here with his heart racing like he'd seen a ghost. But she'd known about Sarah, about Emma, about the $25. How could she know? Martin drove back toward Bakersfield with more questions than answers. The desert had given him something after all. Not peace, not escape, but a mystery that burned in his mind like fever. He would go back. He knew that already. He had to go back, because for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than grief and exhaustion. He felt alive. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Martin lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Calyx standing barefoot in the sand, those pale gray eyes watching him with ancient patience. He saw the farmhouse that shouldn't exist. He heard her voice. "I've been waiting for you." How could she have known about Sarah? About Emma? About the auction? By Sunday morning, he'd convinced himself there was a rational explanation. She'd seen his truck, read the dealer sticker, tracked down his information somehow. Small-town coincidence. Lucky guesses. The farmhouse was probably on some old county record that hadn't been updated. These things happened. Except none of that explained the wrongness he'd felt standing there. The way the air seemed heavier around the house. The way Calyx had looked at him like she could see straight through to his bones. He made coffee and sat at his kitchen table with the parcel map. In the daylight, with distance between himself and the desert, the whole thing seemed almost absurd. A strange woman squatting in an old house. Nothing supernatural about it. Nothing that required more than a phone call to the county sheriff. But he didn't call the sheriff. Instead, he loaded his truck with more supplies. Water bottles, beef jerky, a first aid kit, a blanket. If Calyx was out there alone, she'd need basic things. Maybe if he helped her, she'd answer his questions. Maybe she'd explain how she knew what she knew. The drive out seemed shorter this time. He knew the turns, recognized the landmarks. The morning was clear and hot. The kind of desert day that burned the moisture from your lungs. By the time he reached the property, his shirt was stuck to his back with sweat. The farmhouse stood exactly where it had been, solid and real in the harsh sunlight. Martin parked and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Then he grabbed the supplies and walked toward the porch. Calyx appeared in the doorway before he reached the steps. She wore the same ragged dress, her hair tangled and wild. But in the full light of day, he could see her more clearly. The burns on her shoulders and arms, the way her collarbone stood out too sharply. How long had she been out here alone? "I brought water," Martin said, holding up the bottles. "And food. Thought you might need them." She looked at the offerings but didn't move to take them. "You came back." "Said I would." He climbed the porch steps carefully, testing each board. Some creaked, others held firm. Up close, he could see the house was sturdier than it looked. Old, yes. Weathered, but maintained somehow. The windows were dusty but not broken. The door hung straight on its hinges. "Can I come in?" he asked. Calyx stepped aside without a word. Martin crossed the threshold and stopped, adjusting to the dimmer interior. The front room was sparse. A few pieces of furniture that looked as old as the house itself. A table, 2 chairs, a wood stove in the corner. No electricity, no plumbing he could see. Dust motes drifted in the bars of sunlight that slanted through the windows, and on the far wall, barely visible in the shadows, was a photograph in a cracked frame. Martin moved closer. The image was faded, water-damaged at the edges. It showed a family standing in front of this very house. Mother, father, 2 children. The photo looked like it was from the 1950s based on the clothing and the washed-out colors. But what made Martin's breath catch was the younger child, a girl maybe 8 or 9 years old. She looked exactly like Calyx. "Is this—" He turned to her. "Is this you?" "That's the Welk family," Calyx said quietly. "Thomas and Margaret. Their children, Sarah and Catherine. But the girl looks like me, I know." She moved to stand beside him, studying the photograph. "People who come here always notice, always ask. I don't understand. No one does. Not at first." She touched the frame with one finger, gentle as a whisper. "The Welks owned this land in 1952. They built the house, tried to farm the desert. It didn't work. The land had other purposes." Martin felt like he was missing something fundamental, grasping at pieces of a puzzle he couldn't see whole. "What purposes? What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Calyx walked to the back door and pushed it open. "Come, I'll show you." He followed her out into the yard behind the house. The land stretched flat and featureless, but about 50 yards from the structure, Martin saw something that made him stop. A stone, large and weathered, half buried in the sand. It was different from the surrounding rocks, darker, smoother, clearly placed rather than natural. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, not words exactly. More like marks or signs that hurt to look at too long, like they shifted when you weren't watching directly. "The boundary stone?" Calyx said. "This is what I watch. This is the line." Martin approached slowly. The stone was maybe 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide. Ancient. He could feel something coming off it. Not heat exactly, but a kind of pressure, like standing too close to a transformer or a high-voltage line. "What is it?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. "A marker, a warning, a lock." Calyx circled the stone, never taking her eyes from it. "This spot is where 2 places meet. Our world and somewhere else. The stone keeps them separate, keeps things from crossing over." "That's—" Martin laughed, but it sounded forced even to his own ears. "That's not possible. You're talking about—" "What? Another dimension? That's science fiction." "Call it what you want. It doesn't change what it is." She knelt beside the stone, running her fingers over the symbols. "People have watched this line for generations. Someone always has to. If the boundary goes unwatched, things slip through. Bad things." Martin looked around at the empty desert. Nothing moved except the wind. "I don't see anything." "That's because I'm here, because I watch. But I'm tired, Martin. So tired." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I've been here longer than I should be. Longer than anyone should be. I need someone to take my place." "Why me?" "Because it's in your blood. Because your father was supposed to stand here and didn't. Because the line called you here, and you answered." She stood, facing him fully. "You felt it, didn't you? When you saw the auction listing, when you bid on this land. Something pulled you here." He wanted to deny it, wanted to say he'd just been desperate, making a stupid choice in a moment of weakness. But that would be a lie. There had been something, a feeling he couldn't name, a certainty that this was where he needed to be. "My father?" The word came out sharp. "What does he have to do with this?" "Everything. But that's a story for later. Calyx moved back toward the house. Right now, you need to decide something. You can leave. Go back to Bakersfield. Pretend you never found this place. Forget about the woman in the desert and the stone with strange marks. Live your life. She paused at the porch steps. Or you can stay. Ask your questions. Learn what this place is and why it matters. Learn what you're meant for. Martin looked at the boundary stone, then at the house, then at Calyx with her burned skin and ancient eyes. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to get in his truck and drive away. Call the sheriff, let them handle it, wash his hands of this insanity, but he thought about his empty house in Bakersfield, his failing shop, the bills he couldn't pay, and the daughter who'd grown distant. He thought about Sarah's ring hanging against his chest and the 3 years he'd spent just existing, not living. What did he have to go back to? I'll come back tomorrow, he said finally. I have questions, a lot of them, and I want answers. You'll get them. Calyx smiled, and for just a moment she looked young, almost peaceful. The line will give you what you need to know. It always does. Martin walked back to his truck on legs that felt uncertain. He sat behind the wheel and looked back at the farmhouse. Calyx stood on the porch, watching him. Waiting. He started the engine and drove away, but this time he knew with absolute certainty, that he would return. Something had started here. Something that reached back through his life, through his father's life, through generations he didn't understand yet. The boundary stone sat in his mind like a splinter, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. And deep in his chest, beneath Sarah's ring, something that had been asleep for 3 years began to wake. Monday morning, Martin opened the shop like always. Changed the oil on a Honda, replaced brake pads on a Ford, listened to Ray complain about his ex-wife and the Dodgers pitching. Normal things, ordinary things, except nothing felt ordinary anymore. He kept seeing the boundary stone in his mind, the symbols carved into its surface, Calyx's pale eyes watching him like she could read every secret he'd ever kept. Tuesday, he went back. This time he brought proper supplies, groceries, bottled water, a battery-powered lantern. When he arrived, Calyx was sitting on the porch steps like she'd been expecting him at exactly this hour. She accepted the supplies with a nod, but no thanks. Gratitude seemed foreign to her, like a language she'd forgotten. I want to look inside the house, Martin said. Really look. If I'm going to understand this, I need to see everything. She stood and led him in. The interior was cooler than outside, the thick walls holding back the desert heat. In daylight, Martin could see more details. The furniture was old but cared for. Someone had swept recently. The floors were clean despite the dust that blew constantly outside. In the kitchen, if you could call it that, there was a hand pump for water. Dry goods in sealed containers, evidence of long habitation. How long have you been here? Martin asked. I don't count the days anymore. Years, many years. Calyx moved through the rooms like a ghost, barely disturbing the air. Time works differently when you watch the line. It stretches, compresses. You lose track. In what must have been a bedroom, Martin found a metal trunk pushed against the wall. He glanced at Calyx, who nodded permission. Inside were old newspapers, letters, documents. He pulled them out carefully, spreading them on the floor. The newspapers dated back to the 1950s. Headlines about Eisenhower, the Korean War, local events in Bakersfield. Underneath was a stack of letters tied with string, addressed to Thomas Welk at this property. Martin untied them and read. They were from the county surveyor's office. Official correspondence about property boundaries, water rights, soil surveys. Dry bureaucratic language. But tucked between those letters was something different. A small photograph, edges curled with age. Martin held it up to the light from the window. It showed the same family from the framed photo in the main room, but this one was more casual. A snapshot. The mother and daughter were laughing at something off camera. The father stood serious and straight. And the younger daughter, the one who looked like Calyx, was staring directly at the lens with those same pale grey eyes. "This is you," Martin said. "Not a question. It looks like me. But I'm not Catherine Welk, if that's what you're asking." Calyx knelt beside him. "I told you. I watched the line. That's what I am now. What I was before. It doesn't matter much. Everyone was something before." "Were you?" She tilted her head. "Are you still a husband even though your wife is gone? Are you still a father when your daughter won't speak to you? We become what we do, Martin. What we choose. I chose to watch. Or it chose me. Either way, here I am." The words stung because they were true. He'd been defining himself by loss for 3 years. Widower, debtor, failure. Those were the roles he wore. But what was he choosing to be, really? He set the photograph aside and kept digging through the trunk. Near the bottom, he found a leather-bound journal, the cover cracked and water-stained. He opened it carefully. The first page read, "Property Survey and Personal Observations. Thomas Welk, County Surveyor, 1952. Martin's pulse quickened. He turned pages, scanning entries. May 3rd, 1952. Completed boundary survey of Township 32S, Range 26E. Discovered irregularity in magnetic readings near the southeast corner. Compass behaves erratically within 50-yard radius of large stone marker. Will investigate further. May 17th, 1952. Returned to site with additional equipment. Magnetic anomaly persists. Local residents report strange occurrences. Voices at night, shadows that move wrong, livestock that refuse to approach the area. Old-timer named Crawford says the stone has been here since before memory, claims it marks a crossing point. June 2nd, 1952. Crawford disappeared 3 nights ago. Search party found his truck near the stone, but no sign of him. Sheriff called it off after 2 days. I know what happened. He crossed the line. I saw the footprints leading toward the marker, and then nothing. Like he stepped into air. Martin looked up at Calyx. "What line? What was he talking about?" "Keep reading." His hands shook as he turned more pages. June 15th, 1952. I've been watching the stone for 2 weeks now. Something is wrong with this place. At night I can hear them on the other side. Voices, movements, things that sound almost human but aren't. The boundary is thin here. Thinner than it should be. Someone needs to watch it. Someone needs to keep them from crossing. July 1st, 1952. The keeper came to me last night. Old woman, looks like she's been here 100 years. She says it's her time to rest, that the line needs a new watcher. She says it has to be someone with ties to the land, someone the boundary will accept. I don't understand most of what she tells me, but I understand this. If no one watches, they break through. All of them. Everything that's been kept back for generations. July 4th, 1952. I told Margaret I have to stay. She thinks I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. But I know what I saw. I know what's at stake. She took the girls and went back to town. I don't blame her. This isn't a life for a family, but someone has to do it. The old keeper is fading fast. If I don't take her place, the entry ended there. Martin flipped through more pages, but they were blank. He went back to the dated entries, looking for more. August 10th, 1952. It's done. I am the keeper now. I can feel the boundary in my bones, like a second heartbeat. The old woman dissolved into light when I accepted. She smiled before she went. Said I was saving more lives than I'd ever know. I hope she's right. I hope this means something. That was the last entry. Martin closed the journal and sat back. His mind raced, trying to process what he'd read. Thomas Welk had become a keeper. He'd watched the line, just like Calyx. But the photo showed him with his family in the 1950s, and the house was still standing now, 70 years later. "Where is he?" Martin asked. "What happened to Thomas Welk?" "He fulfilled his duty, watched for as long as he could. Then someone else took his place." Calyx stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the boundary stone. "There's always someone, always has been. The line requires it. And you're the current keeper." "I am." "For how long?" She was quiet for a moment. "Too long, longer than most. I'm tired, Martin. The boundary takes something from you every day, your humanity, your memories, your name. Eventually, you're just the watching. Just the duty. I can feel myself fading." "So you need a replacement." "I need someone willing to take this on. Someone the line will accept." She turned to face him. "It doesn't call just anyone. But it called you. Your father before you. This runs in your blood whether you knew it or not." "My father," Martin repeated. "You keep mentioning him. Tell me what that means." "Not yet. First, you need to understand what the line is, what you'd be protecting against." Calyx moved toward the back door. "Come with me tonight. When the sun goes down, I'll show you what watches from the other side. Then you can decide if you believe me." Martin wanted to say no, wanted to grab the journal and go straight to the county records office, verify these entries, find Thomas Welk's death certificate or disappearance report, anything concrete, anything real. But he knew he'd be back tonight. He knew he couldn't walk away. Now. "What time?" he asked. "Dusk, when the light changes. That's when the boundary is thinnest." Martin stood, brushing dust from his jeans. He looked around the spare room, at the trunk full of impossible stories, at the woman who claimed to be something more than human. "I'll be here," he said. Calyx nodded. "I know you will. The line knows too. It's been waiting for you a long time, Martin Kell, almost as long as I have." Martin spent the afternoon in Bakersfield trying to act normal. He ate lunch at the diner, responded to a customer's questions about a timing belt, checked his phone twice for messages from Emma that never came. The whole time, Thomas Welk's journal entries played in his mind like a film reel stuck on loop. He crossed the line. I saw the footprints leading toward the marker, and then nothing. At 3 o'clock, he closed the shop early. Ray gave him a curious look, but didn't ask questions. Good. Martin didn't have answers he could speak out loud anyway. He stopped at the Bakersfield Public Library on his way home. The building was small, understaffed, run by volunteers who smiled too much and knew everyone's business. The woman at the reference desk recognized him. "Martin Kell, haven't seen you in here since—" She paused, realizing where that sentence was going. "Since a while. How can I help you?" "County records," he said. "Specifically property records and surveyor reports from the 1950s. Township 32 South, Range 26 East." She blinked. "That's pretty specific." "Research project?" "Something like that." It took her 20 minutes to pull up what little existed. The county had digitized some records, but not everything. What Martin found was sparse. A few property transfers, tax records, surveyor maps from the era. Thomas Welk's name appeared several times as the surveyor of record. But after July 1952, his signature stopped appearing on official documents. Martin asked the librarian about missing person reports from that time period. She searched the newspaper archives on microfiche. No mention of Thomas Welk's disappearance, no obituary, no record of death. He'd simply stopped existing in the official record. "Maybe he moved," the librarian suggested. "People did that back then, just picked up and went somewhere else." Maybe. But Martin didn't believe it. He left the library as the sun angled low, painting the mountains gold in shadow. He drove home, showered, changed clothes, stood in his kitchen staring at the clock until it was time to go. The drive to the property felt different in the evening. The desert took on deeper colors, reds and purples and oranges that didn't exist in the harsh noon light. By the time Martin reached the farmhouse, the sky was bleeding toward dusk. Calyx was waiting on the porch. She'd changed, or rather, she'd found different rags to wear. A man's old work shirt that hung to her knees. Her hair was tied back with a piece of frayed rope. In the fading light, she looked less feral, more like someone who'd been lost for a very long time and was only now remembering how to be found. "Come," she said simply. They walked together toward the boundary stone. The desert was cooling, the heat bleeding out of the sand into the darkening sky. Martin felt the change in temperature, but also something else. A kind of pressure building in his chest, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. The air tasted metallic. "Do you feel it?" Calyx asked. "I feel something." "The boundary. It's always there, but at dusk and dawn, when the light shifts, it becomes more present, more real." She stopped about 10 yards from the stone. "This is close enough for now." Martin stood beside her, looking at the marker. In the twilight, the symbols seemed to move, writhing like living things. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the effect persisted. "Watch," Calyx whispered. At first, Martin saw nothing different. Just the stone, the desert, the sky turning from gold to indigo. Then, gradually, he became aware of movement at the edge of his vision. Shapes that weren't quite there when he looked directly at them. Shadows that fell wrong, angling toward the stone instead of away from the dying light. "What?" He started to speak, but Calyx raised a hand. "Just watch. Don't look straight at them. They're not fully here. Not yet." Martin shifted his gaze, using his peripheral vision the way you do when trying to see stars at night. And suddenly, they became clearer. Figures, dozens of them, standing just beyond the boundary stone, facing toward it. Facing toward him. They looked almost human. Almost. But the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, heads tilted at angles that should break necks. Some were translucent, like heat shimmer. Others were darker, more solid, pressing against some invisible barrier Martin couldn't see. One of them opened its mouth, and Martin heard sound, not words, not exactly, but something that approximated language. A whisper that might have been a name. His name. He took a step back. "They can't cross," Calyx said quietly. "Not while I watch. Not while the boundary holds. But they want to. They've wanted to for longer than you can imagine." "What are they?" "The lost, the forgotten, the things that slipped through in the time before anyone watched. They exist in the space between here and there, neither alive nor dead. Just waiting." She moved closer to the stone and the figures recoiled slightly. Some were human ones. Most weren't. All of them hunger for this world, for warmth, for substance, for life. Martin watched, unable to look away now. The figures pressed against the invisible barrier, their movements becoming more agitated as full darkness fell. More appeared, emerging from nothing, until the space beyond the stone was crowded with them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. "If they crossed," he began, "they would spread. Like infection. They would take what they could from the living. Some would possess, some would kill, some would simply exist among us, wearing stolen faces, pretending to be human while slowly draining the life from everything they touched." "That's..." Martin struggled for words. "That's insane. That's not possible." "Look at them, Martin. Are they possible?" He couldn't argue. The evidence was writhing in front of him, pressing against the boundary with desperate hunger, and somewhere in the mass of shapes, he thought he saw a face he recognized. A man in his 60s, wearing clothes from another era. The face was indistinct, shifting, but for just a moment, it looked almost familiar. "Who is that?" Martin pointed. Calyx followed his gesture. "Which one?" "That man. The one in the back. He looks But the face had changed, melted into something else. Never mind. She studied him carefully. Sometimes the line shows you what you need to see, or what you fear seeing. It knows you now, Martin. It's testing you, showing you what's at stake. The sun dropped below the horizon and the temperature plummeted. Martin's breath came out in visible puffs. Though it had been 90 degrees an hour ago, the figures beyond the stone became more agitated, pressing harder against the invisible barrier. And then Calyx began to speak. Not in English, not in any language Martin recognized. The words were old and hard, and they cut through the air like blades. As she spoke, the figures retreated. Slowly, reluctantly. They pulled back from the boundary, fading into the darkness beyond until Martin could barely see them. When Calyx stopped speaking, the pressure in the air released. The temperature rose. The night became just a night again. Martin realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it out slowly. "That's what I do," Calyx said, her voice hoarse from the strange words. "Every dusk, every dawn, sometimes in between when they push too hard. I remind them of the boundary. I hold the line, and in return," she smiled bitterly, "in return, I fade a little more each time. The duty takes what it needs to function. Eventually, there's nothing left but the watching." "How long before—" Martin couldn't finish the question. "Before I'm gone completely. Not long now, maybe months, maybe less." She turned to face him fully. "That's why you're here. That's why the line called you. It needs a replacement before I'm too far gone to pass the duty on." Martin looked at the boundary stone, then back toward the farmhouse. Everything he thought he knew about the world had just been rewritten. The rules had changed. Reality was bigger and stranger and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. "I need time," he said, "to think, to understand what this means. Time is the one thing we don't have much of." But Calyx nodded. "Go home. Come back when you're ready. The line will wait, but not forever." Martin walked back to his truck on unsteady legs. Behind him he could feel the boundary stone like a weight on his back. And beyond that, hundreds of hungry things waiting for the barrier to fail. He drove away into the darkness, but he could still feel them watching, still hear their whispers carried on the desert wind. Martin Kell. Martin Kell. Come back, come home. Take your place. He gripped the steering wheel and drove faster, trying to outrun voices that lived in his head now, that would never fully leave. For 3 days, Martin tried to convince himself he'd imagined it. Heat exhaustion, stress hallucinations, maybe carbon monoxide from the truck's exhaust. The mind could play tricks when you were grieving, when you were desperate, when you spent too much time alone. But he couldn't explain away the journal. Thomas Welk's handwriting documenting the same things Calyx had told him. The surveyor's official records that stopped abruptly in July 1952. The photograph of a family that looked wrong somehow, like it had been taken in 2 different times at once. Wednesday morning, his phone rang. Emma's name on the screen sent his heart into his throat. "Dad?" "Emma, hi, it's good to hear from you. Are you okay?" Her voice was tight, worried. "Aunt Linda says you haven't been returning her calls. The court sent another letter about the support payments." Martin closed his eyes. He'd forgotten about the court, forgotten about Linda's calls. Everything outside the boundary stone had started to feel distant and unimportant. "I'm fine, just working, busy at the shop." "You're lying." "Not angry, just factual. You've been lying for weeks now. Where are you really spending your time?" He could hear Sarah in Emma's voice. That same directness, that refusal to accept easy answers. "I bought some land," he said carefully. "Out in the desert. I've been fixing it up." "You bought land? With what money?" "It was cheap, $25. Silence on the other end. Then, "Dad, that's insane. You can't even afford your rent and you're buying desert property?" "I needed something that was mine, Emma. Something that—" He struggled for words that wouldn't sound crazy. "Something that made sense." "None of this makes sense. Dad, I'm worried about you. Aunt Linda is worried. We think maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or—" "I don't need a counselor." "Then what do you need?" Her voice cracked. "Because from here, it looks like you're falling apart. First you stop calling, then you miss payments. Now you're buying worthless land and disappearing into the desert. What am I supposed to think?" Martin pressed his palm against his forehead. "I'm not falling apart. I'm trying to figure something out, something important. More important than your own daughter?" The question hung between them like accusation and plea combined. Martin wanted to tell her everything, about Calyx and the boundary and the things that pressed against the barrier at dusk, about his father and the journal and the duty that ran in his blood whether he accepted it or not. But how could he? She'd think he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. "Nothing is more important than you," he said quietly. "Emma, I love you. I've always loved you. Everything I do is, I have to go." Her voice was cold now, distant. "Just think about what I said, okay? About talking to someone. Before this gets worse." She hung up before he could respond. Martin sat in his truck outside the shop, staring at the phone. He'd lost Sarah to cancer. Was he losing Emma to his own choices now, to this mystery that had swallowed him whole? But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't walk away. The boundary stone pulled at him like gravity. The questions burned in his mind, and underneath it all was the terrible certainty that Calyx was right. This duty ran in his blood. His father had been called to it. Now, him. That afternoon he made a decision. He'd take Emma to see the property, show her the farmhouse, let her meet Calyx. If she could see what he'd seen, she'd understand. She'd know he wasn't crazy. He called her back. "Come with me this weekend. To the property. Let me show you what I've been working on. Dad, please, just give me that. One trip. If you still think I'm losing it after you see the place, then I'll talk to someone. I promise." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Fine. Saturday. But Dad, if this is what I think it is, if you're just obsessing over empty desert, we're having a serious conversation." "Saturday," Martin agreed. He hung up and immediately wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Saturday morning was clear and hot. Emma drove down from Fresno in her aunt's car, arriving at Martin's place just after 9. She was 17 now, looked so much like Sarah, it hurt. Same dark hair, same serious eyes. But there was steel in her that Sarah had never needed. Life had made Emma harder. They drove toward the property in Martin's truck, making awkward small talk about school and her friends and anything but the real questions hanging between them. The city fell away. The desert opened up. Martin watched Emma's face as the landscape changed, trying to gauge her reaction. When they reached the dirt track leading to his property, Emma frowned. "This is it? Dad, there's nothing here." "Just wait." They drove another 10 minutes, following the GPS coordinates. Martin's heart pounded. The farmhouse would prove everything. Calyx would explain. Emma would see. But when they reached the spot, when Martin stopped the truck and pointed, there was nothing. No farmhouse, no porch, no weathered wood or dark windows, just flat desert, sand and rocks and empty sky. The boundary stone was there, half buried and ancient, but the house was gone. "Dad." Emma's voice was gentle, pitying. "There's nothing here." Martin got out of the truck, walking toward where the house should be. Had to be. He'd been here days ago. He'd gone inside, read the journal, talked with Calyx. It was real, but his boots hit nothing but sand. "No," he said. "No, it's here. It's—" He turned in a circle, looking for any sign. Foundation stones, fence posts, anything. Emma came up beside him. "Dad, please, let's just go home." That's when he saw her. Calyx, standing exactly where the front porch should be. Barefoot in the sand, wearing her ragged clothes, looking at him with those pale grey eyes. "Calyx," Martin pointed. "She's right there, the woman I told you about." Emma looked where he was pointing. "Dad, there's no one there. It's just empty desert." "She's standing right in front of you. How can you not see her?" Calyx shook her head slowly, sadly. "Only those called can cross the line," she said. But Emma gave no sign of hearing. The truth crashed down on Martin like a physical weight. Emma couldn't see the house, couldn't see Calyx. To her, he was standing in the middle of nowhere, pointing at nothing, talking to empty air. "Oh, God," Emma whispered. "Dad, you're scaring me." Martin looked at his daughter's frightened face. Looked at Calyx, who was real and present and impossible. Looked at the boundary stone that hummed with power he couldn't explain. "I'm not crazy," he said, but his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. "I know you're not. You're grieving. You're stressed. But Dad, we need to get you help. Real help." Emma's eyes were wet. "Please, come back to Bakersfield with me. We'll figure this out together." Calyx spoke, though only Martin could hear. "You have to choose, her world or this one. You can't live in both." Martin stood between them, his daughter real and solid and afraid, and the woman who guarded a boundary against things that shouldn't exist. Both were pulling at him. Both were asking him to believe impossible things. "I need to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Need to what? Choose? Explain? Run?" Emma took his arm. "Come on, Dad. Let's go home." Martin let her lead him back to the truck. As they drove away, he looked in the rear-view mirror. Calyx was standing in the desert, growing smaller with distance. Beside her, the farmhouse flickered back into existence for just a moment before vanishing again. The whole drive back, Emma talked about doctors and rest and taking time off work. Martin nodded and made sounds of agreement. But in his mind, he was still standing in the desert, watching shadows press against a boundary only he could see. The line had shown him truth. Now it was asking what he'd do about it, and he still didn't have an answer. Emma left Sunday morning with promises that she'd call, that she'd check in, that she loved him but needed him to take care of himself. Martin stood on his porch and watched her drive away, feeling the distance between them grow with every mile. He'd promised her he'd think about seeing someone, a therapist, a doctor, someone who could explain why he was seeing things that weren't there. But they were there. He knew they were there. Monday, Martin closed the shop and drove to the county clerk's office. He filled out a request form for historical records, specifically anything related to his father, James Kell. The clerk, a bored woman in her 40s, said it would take a few days to pull the old files. "Anything specific you're looking for?" she asked. "Anything from 1968. My father, he disappeared that year. I want to know if there are any official records." She made a note. "Missing person report." "I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out." The files came through Wednesday. Martin sat in a corner of the clerk's office, reading through decades-old documents. Birth certificate for James Kell, 1940. Marriage license, 1966. Work history with the County Road Department. And then, in May 1968, an incident report. Subject, James Kell, county employee. Report filed by Supervisor Harold Grant. Subject failed to report for work, May 15, 1968. No call, no explanation. Attempted contact at home address revealed subject had left without notice. Personal vehicle found abandoned near Township 32S, Range 26E. Sheriff's investigation inconclusive. Subject listed as missing. Case closed December 1968, presumed voluntary departure. Martin read it 3 times. Township 32S, Range 26E, the exact coordinates of his property. His father's truck had been found at the boundary. He found the sheriff's report attached. More details. James Kell's truck had been discovered by a rancher checking fence lines. Keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat. No signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of foul play. The man had simply walked away from his vehicle and vanished. Search teams had combed the area for 3 days. Found nothing. No tracks, no body, no explanation. Just another person the desert had swallowed. But Martin knew better now. His father hadn't been swallowed by the desert. He'd gone to the boundary, and something had happened there. Something that kept him from coming home. That night, Martin sat in his living room with a shoebox he'd kept in the back of his closet for 30 years. Inside were the few things of his father's he'd saved. A watch that didn't work, a pocket knife, and a set of military dog tags from James's service in Vietnam. Martin had never worn them, never even looked at them much. They were just relics of a man who'd abandoned his family. That's what his mother had told him. Your father left. He didn't love us enough to stay. But what if that wasn't true? What if James Kell hadn't left by choice? Martin held the dog tags up to the light. They were standard military issue, stamped with his father's name, serial number, blood type. Nothing special. Nothing that explained anything. But as he held them, he felt something. A warmth spreading from the metal into his palm, like recognition, like the tags were responding to something in him. He drove out to the property at midnight. Stupid, maybe. Dangerous, probably. But he needed answers, and the boundary seemed to speak loudest in darkness. The farmhouse was visible again when he arrived, solid and real in his headlights. Calyx stood on the porch, waiting. She always seemed to be waiting. You brought them, she said, looking at the dog tags in his hand. How did you know? The line knows. It remembers. She descended the porch steps, moving toward him. Your father wore those. He came here wearing them. He stood at the boundary and made his choice. What choice? Martin's voice came out harsh. Desperate. Come. Calyx led him toward the boundary stone. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered overhead like thrown salt. As they approached, Martin felt the familiar pressure building, the sense of something vast and patient waiting just beyond sight. Calyx stopped at the stone. Your father came here in 1968. He was 38 years old, working for the county, married with a young son. He shouldn't have been called, but the line doesn't care about convenience. When it needs a keeper, it finds one. But he left. He tried to accept, tried to take my predecessor's place. Calyx ran her fingers over the symbols carved into the stone. But at the last moment he couldn't do it. The sacrifice was too great. He had too much to lose. So he tried to walk away. What happened to him? Look. She pointed beyond the stone. Martin looked. In the darkness, the shapes were gathering again, pressing against the invisible barrier, but now, among the writhing shadows, he could make out one figure more clearly than the rest. A man, wearing work clothes from another era, hair cut military short. The figure had his face. Older, weathered, but unmistakably similar. Dad? The word came out strangled. The figure turned toward him. Its eyes, his eyes, were empty, not dead, just elsewhere, looking at something Martin couldn't see. Its mouth moved, forming words without sound. He's been there since 1968, Calyx said quietly. trapped between worlds. When you try to accept the duty but turn away at the last moment, the boundary doesn't let you go. You become caught, neither fully here nor fully there, aware but unable to act, present but unreachable. Martin stared at the figure of his father. 57 years. More than half a century trapped in that liminal space, conscious and aware but unable to cross back, unable to go home to his wife and son, unable to finish what he'd started or undo his choice. Can he hear me? Maybe. The trapped exist in their own time. Every moment for them is the moment they turned away. They live it over and over, unable to change their decision. Martin pressed closer to the boundary, close enough to feel its cold radiating off the stone. Dad, it's Martin, your son. I'm here. The figure's head tilted. For a moment, just a moment, the empty eyes seemed to focus, to see. And Martin saw recognition, saw his father understanding that his son had found him. Then the figure's mouth moved again. This time, Martin heard words, faint, distant, like a voice carried through water. Don't make mistake. The rest was lost in static that shouldn't exist. But the message was clear. His father was warning him, begging him not to repeat the same error. He wants you to know it's not worth it, Calyx said. The sacrifice is too great. Better to refuse entirely than to accept and fail. But Martin heard something else in those broken words. He heard regret. He heard a man who'd made a choice in fear and had been paying for it ever since. What happens if I accept? Martin asked, still staring at his father's trapped shade. If I become the keeper? You replace me. You watch the line. You hold the boundary against what waits beyond. And in time, you fade into it. Your life ends, but your purpose continues. Calyx touched his shoulder. It's not a small thing to ask. I know that, but someone must do it. Without a keeper, the boundary fails, and everything they've kept back for generations breaks through. Martin thought about his father, trapped for 57 years because he couldn't commit. Thought about Emma, afraid her father was losing his mind. Thought about the shop he was going to lose anyway, the bills he couldn't pay, the life that had been slowly falling apart since Sarah died. What did he have to lose that hadn't already been lost? If I accept, he said slowly, my father goes free, and all the others trapped like him. Yes, the boundary requires a keeper. When a new one takes the duty, the old obligations release. Everyone trapped by failed acceptance goes free, including your father. And if I don't accept? Calyx was quiet for a moment. Then I fade. The boundary weakens, and eventually it fails. What happens after that? She gestured to the shapes beyond the stone. You saw them, hungry, desperate. They've been waiting for the barrier to drop for generations. Imagine them loose in the world. Imagine what they'd take, who they'd hurt. Martin closed his eyes. His father's dog tags were warm against his palm, almost hot now, like they were trying to tell him something, like they remembered what his father couldn't finish. I need time, he said, to think, to be, sure. Time is running out, I can feel it. The boundary is weakening. Every day I'm less able to hold it. Calyx's voice was urgent now. Martin, you were called for a reason. The line knows what it needs. It chose you. I know, I need to be sure. This is forever, isn't it? Yes. Once accepted, you can't change your mind. You're bound until someone else takes your place. Martin looked at his father one more time. The figure stood motionless now, trapped in its eternal moment of regret. I'll come back, Martin said. Soon. I promise. He walked back to his truck with the dog tags clutched in his hand and his father's warning echoing in his mind. Don't make the same mistake. But which mistake? Accepting or refusing? His father had tried to accept and failed. Maybe the mistake was hesitation. Maybe the mistake was fear. Martin drove home through the desert darkness, knowing he was running out of time to decide which path would save more than it destroyed. Thursday morning, Martin woke from dreams of his father's face, empty eyes, silent mouth forming words he couldn't hear. He made coffee with shaking hands and sat at his kitchen table staring at the dog tags. The metal had cooled overnight, but he could still feel the warmth it had carried at the boundary stone, like it remembered something he didn't. He called Emma. She picked up on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Dad?" "I'm okay," he said before she could ask. "I know you're worried, but I'm okay. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Dad, let me finish." He gripped the phone tighter. "I love you. I've always loved you. Even when I've been a terrible father, even when I've let you down, that's never changed. I need you to know that. Whatever happens, I need you to know I did everything because I loved you." Silence on the other end. Then, "Dad, you're scaring me. What's happening? Where are you?" "I'm home. I'm fine. He couldn't explain. "I'll call you soon, okay? And Emma, your mom would be so proud of who you've become." He hung up before she could respond, before his resolve could weaken. The shop could wait. The bills could wait. Everything could wait. He had to know the full truth before he made any decision. And there was one place he hadn't explored yet. Martin drove back to the property in full daylight. The farmhouse stood solid and patient, and Calyx was working in what might have been a garden once, though nothing green grew there now. She looked up when he approached, unsurprised. "I need to see everything," Martin said. "No more hints or partial truths. I need to understand what I'm choosing." Calyx stood, brushing sand from her hands. "All right, come inside." She led him through the house to a door he hadn't noticed before. It was set into the floor of the back room, nearly invisible under a worn rug. Calyx pulled the rug aside, revealing a cellar entrance. "Down there," she said. "Everything you need to know." The steps were steep and narrow, leading into cool darkness. Calyx lit an oil lamp and descended, Martin following close behind. The cellar was larger than he expected, stretching beneath the entire footprint of the house, and covering every wall were shelves holding journals, papers, artifacts. "The records of every keeper," Calyx said, gesturing around the room. "Going back centuries, each one documented their time watching the line, their experiences, their struggles, their understanding of what this place is." Martin moved to the nearest shelf and pulled down a journal at random. The leather binding was ancient, cracking. Inside, the handwriting was neat and formal, dated 1847. He read a few entries. "The boundary requires constant vigilance. Last night they pressed harder than ever before, testing for weakness. I held, but I am tired. So very tired." He replaced it and pulled another, this one from 1903. "I watched a man try to cross today. He said he was searching for his lost wife, that he'd heard her voice calling from beyond. I tried to stop him, but he was determined. The moment he stepped past the stone, he was gone. Simply ceased to exist in this world. Now I see him among the others, pressing against the barrier. His mouth forms his wife's name over and over. A warning to others, perhaps, or simply eternal torment. Journal after journal, keeper after keeper. Some had watched for years, others for decades. All of them faded eventually, consumed by the duty. All of them replaced when they could no longer hold the line." "Why?" Martin asked. "What is this place? Why does it need guarding?" "The line is old," Calyx said. "Older than any record. It's a thin place where the membrane between worlds wears away. Without someone to maintain the boundary, reality bleeds. What's on the other side seeps through. Not another dimension, exactly. More like the space where lost things gather, the forgotten, the erased. Everything that slips through the cracks of existence ends up there. And they want to come back. They hunger for it, for substance, for reality. They press constantly against the barrier, and without a keeper to strengthen it, the boundary would eventually fail. Martin pulled down another journal. This one was newer, the pages less yellowed. He opened it and saw Thomas Welk's handwriting again, but these were entries he hadn't seen before. From later in his time as keeper. September 1954. I saw my daughter Catherine today, or rather, I saw something wearing her face. She came to the boundary and called to me, said she missed me, said the family needed me to come home. But Catherine is 8 years old and alive in Bakersfield. This thing was using her voice to lure me across. I held firm, but good. It's hard, so hard to remember who I am, what I'm protecting. January 1959. I can barely remember my wife's face. The duty has taken so much. I'm more boundary than man now. But still I watch. Still I hold. Because no one else will. The journal ended there. Martin looked at Calyx. What happened to Welk? He faded. Eventually we all do. The boundary consumes the keeper bit by bit. Memories first, then personality. Finally, even awareness. You become just the watching, just the duty made flesh. She touched one of the journals gently. I replaced him in 1963. I've been here 62 years. 62? Martin stared at her. But you look... Time moves differently for the keeper. We age slower, die slower, fade slower, but we still fade. She met his eyes. I'm running out. Another few months and I won't have enough left to maintain the barrier. That's why you were called now. The line knew it was time. Martin sank onto a wooden crate, overwhelmed. The cellar felt like a tomb. All these journals, all these lives consumed by this impossible duty. There has to be another way, he said. Some other solution. There isn't. Believe me, every keeper has searched for one. The boundary requires a conscious will to maintain it, a human presence anchoring it to this reality. Without that... She was interrupted by a sound from upstairs. A creaking, then footsteps. Calyx's expression changed. Someone's here, someone who can cross. They climbed the stairs quickly. Martin emerged into the main room and froze. Standing in the center of the farmhouse was Emma. She looked around, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Dad? What? Where am I? How did I get here? Emma. Martin moved toward her. How did you find this place? I didn't. I was driving. I was on the highway and I just turned like I was supposed to. And then I was on the dirt road and then... She saw Calyx and recoiled. Who is that? You can see her. Martin's heart hammered. Emma, you can see the house. See Calyx. Of course I can see her. Dad, what's happening? Why am I here? Calyx stepped forward, her face grave. The line called her. She's blood. Same as you. Same as your father. No, Martin said immediately. No, she's not part of this. She goes back. Right now. But Emma was looking past them toward the back of the house, toward the boundary stone visible through the window. I hear them, she whispered. Voices, calling my name. Don't listen, Calyx said sharply. Emma, look at me. Don't listen to the voices. But Emma was moving toward the door like she was being pulled. Martin grabbed her arm. Stop! Emma, you have to stop. She looked at him and her eyes were unfocused. They're calling me, Dad. They say there's someone I need to see. Someone who's been waiting. Calyx cursed under her breath. They're showing her something. Someone. Using her bloodline connection to lure her across. Across where? Emma tried to pull free of Martin's grip. The boundary, where your grandfather is. Calyx moved to block the door. Emma, what you're hearing is a trick. They'll show you whatever you want to see to get you to cross. But if you step over that line, you'll be trapped, just like everyone else who tried and failed to accept the duty. My grandfather. Emma stopped, struggling. Dad, what is she talking about? Martin held his daughter's shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Your grandfather. My father. He came here in 1968 and tried to become a keeper, but he couldn't go through with it. Now he's trapped, caught between worlds. Emma, everything you're hearing, everything you're seeing, it's not real. It's the boundary trying to trap you too. Emma's eyes cleared slightly. This is insane. This can't be real. It is real. I know how it sounds, but it's real, and we need to get you out of here. Now. Calyx shook her head. It's too late. Once the line calls someone, once they cross the threshold, they can't leave until they make a choice. Accept or refuse. She has to decide. She's 17 years old. She's not deciding anything. Martin pulled Emma toward the front door, but when he tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The wood was solid, immovable, like it was sealed to the frame. The house won't let her leave, Calyx said quietly. Not until she chooses. Martin turned back, panic rising. Then I'll choose for her. She refuses. She goes home. That's not how it works. The line called her specifically. She has her own connection, her own choice to make. Calyx looked at Emma with something like sympathy. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would call her, but bloodlines run deep. 3 generations. You, your father, your grandfather. The duty wants your family. Emma was looking between them, fear giving way to understanding. If I refuse, what happens? You go home. Live your life. Forget this place. Calyx paused. But someone still has to watch. If your father refuses too, then the boundary fails, and everything beyond it comes through. And if I accept? No, Martin said firmly. Emma, no. You're not even considering this. But Emma was looking at the boundary stone through the window. I can see him. Grandpa. He's out there. He looks like you, Dad. He looks like family. That's the trap. I know it's a trap. I'm not stupid. She turned to Calyx. What happens if I accept? Tell me everything. Calyx told her. The duty, the fading, the slow consumption of self until only the watching remained. The years or decades of isolation, the hunger of the things beyond. All of it. When she finished, Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, If I accept, everyone trapped goes free, including Grandpa. Yes. And the boundary holds? The things beyond stay beyond? Yes. Emma, you can't do this, Martin pleaded. You have your whole life ahead of you. College, career, love, children, all of it. I won't let you throw that away. Emma looked at him, and in that moment, she looked so much like Sarah, it broke his heart. The same strength, the same clarity of purpose. Dad, you've been dying inside since Mom passed. I've watched it happen. You're not living, you're just waiting to stop hurting. But this place needs someone who still has something to lose. Someone who'll fight to stay human as long as possible. Then I'll do it. I'll accept. You go home. No. Emma's voice was firm. Because you'll do it out of guilt and grief. You'll fade faster than anyone, but I'll do it out of purpose. To save you. To save Grandpa. To protect the world from things that should stay forgotten. That's enough to keep someone going for a long time. Tears were running down Martin's face. I can't lose you too. Emma, please. I've already lost your mother. I can't. You won't lose me. I'll be right here. You can visit. Talk to me. Watch me grow into this duty the right way. She took his hands. Dad, this is my choice. Let me make it. In the distance, through the window, Martin could see his father's trapped shade reaching toward them. 57 years of torment. And beyond him, hundreds more. All waiting for release. And standing in front of him was his daughter, offering to take on a burden he'd been too afraid to carry himself. The choice had never really been his. It had always been hers. No. The word came out of Martin like a command. like he still had authority here. "Emma, no, I won't allow this." "You can't stop me, Dad. The line called me. This is my choice. You're a child. I'm 17. In 6 months, I'm an adult. I make my own decisions." Emma pulled her hands free and turned to Calyx. "What do I need to do?" Calyx looked between father and daughter, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "There's a ritual. It requires preparation, and it requires both of you to understand what's happening. I won't proceed until you're both ready." "I'm ready now," Emma said. "No, you're not." Calyx moved to the window, looking out at the boundary stone. "You're brave. You're determined. But you don't understand what you're accepting yet. The duty doesn't just take your time, Emma. It takes you, everything you are, everything you might have been. Once you accept, there's no going back, no changing your mind. You'll watch this line until another keeper comes to replace you. That could be decades from now, or longer." "I understand. You think you do. But understanding and living it are different things." Calyx turned back. "So here's what happens. You both stay here tonight. You see what the duty really means. You watch me hold the boundary at dusk and at dawn. You look into the faces of what waits beyond and know that will be your job, every day, for the rest of your life." "And if I still want to do it tomorrow?" Emma asked. "Then I'll perform the ritual. I'll transfer the duty, and you'll become what I am." Martin wanted to argue, wanted to grab Emma and force her out of this house, drive her back to Fresno, lock her in her room until she came to her senses. But looking at her face, he saw the same expression Sarah had worn when she decided to fight the cancer with every treatment available, no matter how painful. That stubborn determination that couldn't be argued with. "Fine," he said, quietly. "We stay, we watch. And then we talk about this again. Really talk." "Agreed," Emma said. The afternoon stretched long and tense. Calyx showed them around the property, explaining the geography of the boundary. The stone was the center, but the line extended in both directions, forming a barrier roughly a quarter-mile long. Other stones marked the end points, though they were smaller, less ornate. "Why here?" Martin asked. "Why this specific spot?" Thin places exist all over the world, spots where reality wears away. Most are small, manageable. A few are like this, major crossings that require active guarding. There are other keepers elsewhere, watching other boundaries. We don't communicate. Each of us is isolated with our duty. Emma walked along the line, staying carefully on the safe side. What happens if someone crosses accidentally, like if they just wander into the desert and step over? If they don't have the calling, if their bloodline isn't tied to the duty, then nothing. They walk right through. Only those called by the line can see what's really here. Only they can cross intentionally. "But anyone can be taken," Calyx continued. "If the boundary fails, if the things beyond break through, they can take anyone, possess them, consume them. That's why someone has to watch, to keep the barrier strong." They returned to the house as the sun began its descent. Calyx prepared, though Martin couldn't quite see what she was doing. Centering herself, maybe. Gathering strength. When the light began to change, turning the desert gold and red, she led them outside. "Stay behind me," she said. "Don't speak, don't approach the stone, just watch." The three of them stood facing the boundary as dusk fell. Martin felt the familiar pressure building, the air growing heavier, the temperature dropping despite the day's heat. Beside him, Emma gasped. "I see them," she whispered. "Dad, I see." "I know." He took her hand, squeezed it. "I see them too." The shapes were gathering, more than Martin had seen before. Dozens became hundreds. They pressed against the invisible barrier, their forms writhing and shifting. Some looked almost human. Others were nightmare amalgamations that hurt to look at directly. And among them, standing near the front, was Martin's father. James Kell, trapped for 57 years, watched his son and granddaughter with empty, desperate eyes. Emma made a sound in her throat. "Is that your grandfather?" "Yes." Calyx began to speak. The same ancient words Martin had heard before, cutting through the air like razors. As she spoke, the pressure intensified. The shapes pushed harder, testing the boundary. Martin could feel it now, feel the barrier bending under the weight of their hunger. Calyx's voice grew stronger, more commanding. She raised her hands, and light began to emanate from the boundary stone. Not bright, just a faint glow that outlined the invisible barrier, making it temporarily visible. The shapes recoiled from it, shrieking in voices that weren't quite sound. For 10 minutes, Calyx held them back. Her body shook with the effort. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold. When she finally stopped speaking, lowered her hands, the shapes retreated. The pressure released. The barrier became invisible again. Calyx staggered. Martin caught her before she fell. "Every time," she panted. "It gets harder, takes more. I'm fading faster now." "How long?" Martin asked. "Days. Maybe a week. Not more." She straightened, pushing away from his support. "That's why this has to happen soon. If I fade completely before the transfer, the boundary fails immediately. Everything beyond comes through at once." Emma was staring at the boundary stone, her face pale. "That's what you do. Twice a day, every day." "Sometimes more often if they push hard." "Yes. For how long?" 62 years. So far." Emma was quiet for a long moment, then, "I can do that. I know I can." They went inside as true darkness fell. Calyx made a simple dinner from her stores: canned beans, dried meat, water. They ate in silence. Afterward, Emma explored the cellar, reading the journals by lamplight. Martin sat with Calyx on the porch. "Why did it call her?" he asked quietly. "Why not just me?" "The line chooses who it needs. Maybe it knew you'd refuse out of guilt, or that you'd accept out of grief and fade too quickly. Emma is young, strong. She has purpose. That matters." Calyx looked up at the stars. "Or maybe it just knew she'd say yes when you wouldn't." "I would have said yes. Eventually." "Would you? Or would you have hesitated like your father did until it was too late to choose?" Martin didn't answer. He wasn't sure of the truth himself. "She's so much like her mother," he said finally. "Sarah had that same certainty. When she knew something was right, nothing could change her mind. Then you know you can't stop her." "I know, but I can hate this. I can hate that my daughter has to sacrifice everything because of some cosmic duty no one asked for. Every keeper hates it at first, but in time—" Calyx paused. "In time you understand. The duty is hard, but it matters. It's the most real thing in your life. Everything else fades, but the purpose remains. That's not nothing." Inside, Emma emerged from the cellar carrying an armful of journals. She sat at the table and began reading by lamplight, her face serious and intent. Learning, preparing. Martin watched her through the window. His daughter, 17 years old, ready to give up college, career, family, everything normal people took for granted. All to guard a boundary against things that shouldn't exist. Pride and horror warred in his chest. "Tell me about the ritual," he said to Calyx. "What exactly happens?" "There's an iron brand. It's been used for generations, maybe centuries. The symbols on it match the ones carved into the boundary stone. The new keeper must press it to their chest over their heart while speaking. The words of acceptance. The brand burns the symbols into flesh, binds you to the line, transfers the duty. It hurts, beyond anything you can imagine. But it has to. The pain is part of the binding, a willing sacrifice. Once it's done, you are the keeper. The boundary responds to you. The previous keeper is released. And Emma would have to do this? If she chooses, yes. Martin closed his eyes. What if I did it instead? What if I accepted right now before she can? The line has called her specifically. If you try to take her place, it won't work. The binding won't hold. You'd just be a man with a burn scar. Calyx's voice was gentle. Martin, I know this is hard, but the choice was never really yours. It's hers. It's always been hers. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the desert night. In the distance, coyotes called. The wind moved through the Joshua trees, making them creak and sway. Inside, Emma turned pages, her shadow moving across the wall. When midnight passed and dawn began its slow approach, they gathered again at the boundary stone. Calyx repeated the ritual, holding back the shapes that pressed forward with the changing light. Emma watched with fierce attention, memorizing every word, every gesture. When it was over and the shapes had retreated once more, Emma turned to Calyx. I'm ready, she said. I know what I'm choosing. I know what it costs, and I'm ready. Calyx studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we'll do the ritual at sunset. That's when the boundary is strongest, when the transfer is most likely to succeed. Today, Martin's voice cracked. Today, before I fade any further, before the boundary weakens more. Calyx looked at him. You have until sunset to say goodbye to your daughter as she is. After that, she'll be someone different, something different. The keeper. Martin looked at Emma, his little girl who used to sit on his lap while he read her stories, who'd cried when Sarah died and retreated into silence for months, who'd grown into this fierce, determined young woman he barely recognized. Emma, he said, are you absolutely sure? She took his hands. Dad, I'm sure. This is what I'm meant for. I can feel it. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, memorizing the moment. The feel of her alive and human and still entirely his daughter. In a few hours, that would change forever, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The day stretched impossibly long. Martin and Emma walked the property together, not speaking much, just being present with each other. He told her stories about Sarah, about their early years together, before Emma was born, about the dreams they'd had for their daughter's future. She wanted you to be happy, Martin said. Whatever that meant for you, college or trade school or traveling the world, she didn't care what you chose as long as it was yours. And now I'm choosing this. Emma kicked at a rock. Think she'd understand? I think she'd be terrified, but yeah, she'd understand. Your mom always understood the hard choices. They sat on the porch as afternoon shadows lengthened. Martin showed Emma the dog tags, explained what he'd learned about her grandfather. She held them carefully, running her fingers over the stamped metal. Do you think he'd be proud? She asked. If he knew what I was doing? I think he'd beg you not to. Same as I am. Emma smiled sadly. But you're not begging anymore. Because I know it won't work. You're too much like your mother. Once you've decided something matters, nothing can change your mind. Inside the house, Calyx was preparing the ritual space. She'd cleared the main room, drawn symbols on the floor with ash. In the center, she placed the iron brand in a small brazier filled with coals. Martin could see it heating, the metal beginning to glow red. The symbols on the brand matched those on the boundary stone. Looking at them too long made his eyes water, made his head ache. They weren't meant for human comprehension. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust, Calyx emerged. It's time, she said simply. Emma stood. She'd changed into a simple cotton dress Calyx had given her, white, unadorned. Her hair was pulled back. She looked young, too young, but her eyes were steady. Martin wanted to object one more time, wanted to throw himself between Emma and the brand, refused to let this happen. But he'd seen the shapes at the boundary, seen his father trapped among them, known what was at stake. Sometimes love meant letting go. They walked together to the boundary stone. The three of them, Martin, Emma, Calyx. The sun touched the horizon, and the pressure began to build. The shapes were already gathering, sensing something was about to change. Calyx stood before the stone and began the opening words. The same ancient language, but different phrases now. Calling, requesting, asking the boundary to accept a new keeper. The stone began to glow, faint at first, then brighter. The symbols carved into its surface pulsed with light that seemed to come from within the rock itself. Emma stepped forward. She was trembling slightly, but her voice was firm when she spoke. I accept the duty. I offer myself as keeper of this boundary. My life for the line, my will for the barrier. I accept. The words hung in the air like bells. The shapes beyond the boundary surged forward, then stopped. Waiting. Watching. Calyx walked back to the brazier and lifted the brand. The metal glowed white hot now, almost too bright to look at directly. She carried it carefully to Emma. Once this begins, Calyx said, there's no stopping it. The moment the brand touches your skin, the transfer starts. You'll feel everything, every keeper who came before, every moment of duty, every sacrifice. It will try to break you. You have to hold on to who you are for as long as possible. I'm ready. Emma looked at her father. Dad, I love you. Martin's throat closed. I love you too, baby girl. So much. Emma turned back to face the boundary stone. She pulled the dress down slightly, exposing the skin over her heart. Calyx raised the brand. Wait, Martin said suddenly. Emma, there's something you should know, something I need you to understand. Emma looked at him. Dad, when I met your mother, I was lost. I didn't know who I was or what I was meant for. She gave me purpose. She made me better than I was. And then she died, and I lost that purpose again. He stepped closer. But you, Emma, you've always known exactly who you are. You've never needed anyone to give you purpose. So whatever happens, whatever the duty takes from you, hold on to that. Hold on to the fact that you chose this, that you're doing it for the right reasons. Not out of fear or grief, but out of love. That's your strength. Tears ran down Emma's face, but she was smiling. I'll remember, Dad. I promise. Calyx lifted the brand higher. The symbols blazed. The boundary stone sang with a sound that was felt more than heard, resonating in bone and blood. By the old words and the ancient duty, Calyx intoned, by choice freely made and sacrifice willingly offered. I name you Keeper, Emma Kell, guardian of the line. She pressed the brand to Emma's chest. Emma screamed. The sound tore through the desert, raw and terrible. Light exploded from the point of contact, white and blinding. Martin tried to reach her, but Calyx held him back. Don't touch her, not during the transfer. It would kill you both. Emma was on her knees now, the brand still pressed to her skin. Her body convulsed. Her scream became a wail, then a cry that seemed to contain multitudes, all the keepers who had come before, all their pain and sacrifice echoing through her. The boundary stone's light intensified. The shapes beyond the barrier began to dissolve, releasing. Martin saw his father's form shimmer, then start to fade, not vanishing, transforming, being released from his prison. And Emma kept screaming, the brand burning deeper, the symbols etching themselves into her flesh and soul. The light reached a crescendo, so bright Martin had to shield his eyes. Through his fingers, he saw Emma's silhouette, rigid, trembling, held in place by forces he couldn't see or understand. The brand was no longer just metal. It had become part of her, the symbols flowing from iron into flesh, rewriting her at some fundamental level. Calyx stepped back, and as she did, something remarkable happened. Color returned to her cheeks. Her skin, which had been sun-damaged and leathery, smoothed. Her hair, which had hung in tangled rags, became lustrous and dark. She was aging backward, or rather, she was being restored. The duty was releasing her, giving back what it had taken over 62 years. "It's working," Calyx breathed. "The transfer is holding." Beyond the boundary, the trapped souls were rising. Martin's father lifted into the air, his form becoming translucent, peaceful, the empty eyes filled with awareness, with recognition. He looked at Martin one last time, really looked, fully present, and smiled. Then he dissolved into light, pure and clean and free. Others followed. Dozens, then hundreds. Centuries of trapped souls released in a cascade of light that filled the desert like dawn. They rose toward the sky, dispersing into the atmosphere, going wherever released spirits go when their suffering ends. Martin watched through tears as his father finally found peace. Emma's screaming had stopped. She was making small whimpering sounds now, barely conscious. The brand had done its work. The symbols were burned deep into her chest, glowing faintly beneath her skin. As Martin watched, they pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Finally, mercifully, the light faded. The brand cooled to black iron. Emma collapsed forward, and this time, when Martin moved to catch her, Calyx didn't stop him. He gathered his daughter in his arms. Her skin was hot, feverish. The burn over her heart was severe, the symbols raised an angry red, but she was breathing, her eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" Her voice was hoarse, damaged from screaming. "I'm here. I've got you." "Did it work?" "Yes, baby. It worked. You're the keeper now." Emma closed her eyes. "I can feel it. The line, it's inside me. Part of me." She touched the brand mark on her chest and winced. "It hurts." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be." She struggled to sit up, and Martin helped her. "I can feel them too. The things beyond the boundary. They're quieter now, farther away. Because I'm stronger than Calyx was at the end. The barrier is solid again." Calyx knelt beside them. She looked decades younger, maybe 40 instead of ancient. Her eyes were clear and bright. "You did it, Emma. You accepted the duty fully. The line knows you now, recognizes you. And you're free." "Yes. For the first time in 62 years, I'm free." Calyx touched her own face, marveling at the transformation. "I can leave this place. Go back to the world. Age normally. Die normally when my time comes." She looked at Emma with profound gratitude. "Thank you. You saved me. And my grandfather. All the others. Released. At peace. Your acceptance freed them all." Calyx stood slowly, testing her restored body. "I'll leave tonight. Go back to whatever life I can build with the time I have left. But Emma, you should know. The duty gets easier. Not the work itself, but your ability to bear it. In time, you'll find a rhythm, a way to maintain yourself while maintaining the line." "How long before I start to fade?" "Years, maybe decades. You're young and strong. You'll last longer than most." Calyx pulled a journal from her pocket. A new one, blank pages. "Write everything down. Your experiences, your techniques, what you learn. The next keeper will need it." Emma took the journal with shaking hands. "The next keeper. I can't think about that yet." "You will. In time." Calyx looked at Martin. "Take care of her. Visit often. She'll need connection to the human world to stay grounded. Without that, the fading happens faster." "I'll be here," Martin said. "Every day if she needs me." "Not every day. She'll need solitude too. The duty requires focus, but regularly. Enough to remind her who she was before this." The sun had set fully now. Night claimed the desert. Emma stood on unsteady legs, Martin supporting her. Together, they walked to the boundary stone. Emma placed her hand on it, and the symbols flared briefly, responding to her touch. "I can hear them," she said softly. "Whispering, testing, but the barrier holds. It's strong." "Because you're strong," Martin said. Emma looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the change. She was still his daughter, still Emma. But something else lived in her now too, something ancient and powerful and entirely other, the Keeper. "I love you, Dad," she said. "That won't change. No matter how long I do this, no matter what I become, I'll always love you." "I know, baby. I love you too." He kissed her forehead, feeling the heat still radiating from the brand mark. "I'm so proud of you. Your mother would be too." Calyx had already walked to the edge of the property, eager to leave after 6 decades of imprisonment. She turned back one last time. "Emma Kell," she called. "Guard well. Remember why you chose this, and when the time comes to pass the duty on, choose wisely." Then she was gone, walking into the desert darkness toward a life reclaimed. Martin and Emma stood together at the boundary, father and daughter, watching the shapes beyond the barrier settle into their new normal. A new keeper, a new era. Emma swayed slightly, exhausted from the ritual. "I should rest. Tomorrow I'll start learning the patterns, the schedule, how to maintain this properly." "Tomorrow," Martin agreed. "Tonight you rest. I'll stay with you." They walked back to the farmhouse together, and behind them the boundary stone glowed faintly in the darkness, steady and strong under its new guardian's watch. 3 months later. Martin drove the familiar dirt road to the property every Saturday morning. The route had become automatic. Past the state highway, down the county road, along the washboard track until the farmhouse appeared on the horizon. It was visible to him now, always. The line had accepted him as Emma's family, given him permission to see what needed seeing. He parked in the same spot he'd used that first morning when he'd found Calyx. It felt like years ago, though it had been less than 6 months. Everything had changed. Everything and nothing. Emma emerged from the farmhouse as he climbed out of the truck. She looked healthy, strong. The brand mark on her chest had healed into pale silver scars, the symbols still visible but no longer angry red. She wore practical clothes now, jeans and a work shirt, her hair pulled back in a braid. She looked older somehow. Not physically, but in her eyes, like she'd lived decades instead of months. "Dad?" She smiled, and relief flooded through him. She could still smile, still felt joy. That mattered more than anything. "How was your week?" he asked, hugging her carefully. "Quiet. A few tests at the boundary, but nothing serious. They're learning I'm here to stay." She led him inside. The farmhouse was different now, too. Emma had cleaned it properly, organized the shelves, made it more livable. "I've been reading the journals. There's so much knowledge here. Techniques the previous keepers developed. It's actually fascinating." Martin set the groceries he'd brought on the table. Fresh food, batteries, books, the things that kept her connected to the normal world. "You're eating enough?" "Yes, Dad, I'm fine." But she dug into the fresh fruit immediately, and he noticed she'd gotten thinner. The duty took a toll even when you were strong. They sat together on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the desert morning. This had become their ritual. He'd visit, bring supplies, spend a few hours just being present. Then he'd leave before dusk so he didn't have to watch her perform the binding ritual. That was still too hard. "I heard from Calyx," Emma said. "She sent a letter to the post office box." "Yeah? How's she doing?" "Good. She's in Oregon. Found work at a bookstore. Says she's learning how to be normal again. It's harder than she expected." Emma smiled softly. She said she wakes up every dawn and dusk expecting to feel the boundary calling. Phantom duty, she called it. Will it ever fully leave her? I don't think so. The duty changes you. Even when it's gone, the shape of it remains. Emma looked at her hands. I can already feel it settling into me. The patterns, the rhythms. Sometimes I forget what day it is because the only time that matters is dawn and dusk. Martin felt a pang of grief. His daughter, 17 years old, already losing track of normal time. You can still leave this, Emma. It's not too late to... Dad, we've had this conversation. I'm not leaving. This is my purpose. I've made peace with it. Have you? He studied her face. Really? She was quiet for a moment. Most days, yes. Some days it's harder. When I remember things I'll never do. College, dating, maybe having kids someday. Those moments are difficult. She touched the brand mark through her shirt. But then I walk the line and I feel how strong the barrier is because I'm holding it. How many people are safe because I'm here. And that matters more than what I gave up. Martin swallowed hard. Your mother would be so proud of you, and so angry at me for letting this happen. You didn't let it happen. I chose it. There's a difference. Emma took his hand. Dad, you've been beating yourself up for 3 months. It's time to stop. I'm okay. I'm doing what I'm meant to do. You need to do what you're meant to do too. Which is? Live. Really live, not just exist. Go back to the shop. Fix it up. Maybe start dating again. She smiled at his expression. Mom's been gone 3 years, Dad. She'd want you to be happy. I don't know how to do that anymore. Then learn, the same way I'm learning how to be the keeper. One day at a time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. The desert stretched empty and beautiful in all directions. I should tell you, Martin said eventually. I contacted your Aunt Linda, told her you were taking a gap year, doing independent study out here. She thinks I'm crazy, but at least she stopped threatening court action. Thank you. Emma squeezed his hand. I know this isn't easy, having to lie for me, having to explain my absence. I'd do worse for you. You know that. I do. They talked about small things after that. The shop, which was doing better now that Martin had focus again. The new projects he was taking on. The customers who asked about Emma. Normal things. Human things. When the sun started its afternoon descent, Martin stood to leave. Emma walked him to his truck. Next week? She asked. Next week, same time. Bring more of those apples. The Honeycrisp ones. I've been dreaming about them. Will do? He hugged her tight. I love you, Emma. I love you too, Dad. He drove away slowly, watching her in the mirror. She stood in front of the farmhouse, one hand raised in farewell. Then she turned and walked toward the boundary stone, preparing for dusk, preparing to do what she'd accepted, to guard the line, to hold the barrier, to be the keeper. Martin's eyes blurred with tears, but he kept driving, because Emma was right. He needed to live. She was sacrificing everything to protect the world. The least he could do was make sure that world was worth protecting. The desert road stretched ahead. Behind him, the boundary held strong under his daughter's watch, and somewhere between the two, Martin Kell found something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Not for his own happiness, though maybe that would come eventually. But hope that purpose existed, that sacrifice mattered, that even in the midst of impossible choices and supernatural duties, love persisted. Emma would guard the line. Martin would guard Emma's connection to humanity. They would both do their duty, and in that there was meaning. The sun painted the mountains gold and purple. Another day ending, another boundary holding, another daughter growing into the impossible burden she'd chosen, and Martin drove on toward Bakersfield, toward his shop and his small house and his ordinary life that felt a little less empty now, because he knew where Emma was. Knew she was safe, knew she'd chosen this path with open eyes and a brave heart. Sometimes a man loses everything before he finds what he was meant to discover. Martin had lost his wife, nearly lost his daughter, lost his grip on normal reality, but he'd found something too. He'd found proof that heroism still existed, that duty meant something, that love was stronger than fear, and that even in the strangest, most difficult circumstances, family endured. The boundary would hold. Emma would watch, and Martin would visit every Saturday, bringing apples and hope and the reminder that she wasn't alone. That was enough. That had to be enough, and somehow, miraculously, it was.